Hello. We finally reached the final chapter of contracts. Very, very long, and I appreciate all the hard work you've done. I know it can be a little bit overwhelming. What we're going to talk about is really what's considered performance and remedies when someone breaches a contract. I first want to talk about contract conditions. Whenever we sign a contract with someone, um, both parties to that contract have conditions. And basically, it's an event or act that makes us obligated to a party to perform an action or render a performance as specified in the contract. And generally speaking, the conditions are concurrent, meaning um, they take action at the same time, not at the same time necessarily, as in 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, but they happen contemporaneously. Okay, meaning that I agree to buy your car for $5,500. That's a concurrent condition. We both are expected to perform. Okay, but really, one party needs to trigger it, right? Somebody has to start performing, or nothing happens, right? And usually that happens when we're buying goods and we're conveying land. Joe's going to buy 500 widgets from Jeff for 1,500. This will make more sense when I talk about the other two. Okay, so think about concurrent condition is kind of our general default. Then we have condition precedence in contracts. And what that means is something has to happen before I'm obligated to perform at all. Okay. So that means a specific thing has to happen. All right. Other than just you performing as well. And that means things like so long as there's an inspection that clears the property, or so long as I can get the license to do this, or so long as I can get the financing. That means I am not going to ever be obligated under the contract unless those conditions precede what my, I'm sorry, I am not, those conditions precede any obligation I have under the contract. That's probably the better way to say it, is I will not, those conditions will have to happen before I'm obligated. Okay. So they trigger my obligations. Condition subsequent basically says, hey, if something happens, then I don't have to perform. Okay. So basically, if there's a subsequent condition in the contract and it occurs, that releases me from having to perform. It's called an escape clause sometimes, and it basically says, hey, if certain circumstances arise, then no, we won't have to perform. So quiz question number 1 is here. So you'll want to stop your computer and again, enter your answers, please, in the quiz format. And here is question 2. We're now going to talk about breach of a contract, okay? And so first let's talk about performing the contract. There is something called strict performance. And basically when we talked about the conditions of the contract, strict performance says the contract has to be performed under the conditions as they are. And if you don't do them the way the condition is, it results in a breach. Okay. So let's say a company prohibited a company from using subcontractors to perform the cleaning services. And regardless of that clause, the company performed the services through a subcontractor. So they went ahead and had a subcontractor. And there was nothing in the there was nothing that suggested that the performance was bad or that there was a loss of any party. There was nothing. But the party who hired them to clean said, I'm not paying you because this is a breach. This was a strict performance and it was a condition, and you did not follow it, so I'm not going to pay you. And there was one court that held that breach entitled the other party to basically refuse payment because it was strict performance. Most contracts are what we call substantial performance. And even though the performance may fall short of complete performance in some minor respect, but it doesn't provide the other party of the material part of what they bargained for, they're going to say that they have substantially performed and that they can then sue you if you don't live up to your end of the bargain. So, for example, a contract to buy property consisting of 100 acres, but it only ended up being 97. And so they said, the other party said, I'm not paying you. And the prior landlord who transferred the property sued. And the court said, yes, even though it was 3 acres less, you substantially performed by rendering 97 acres, and they breached their contract, and we're going to let you sue. So that's the difference between substantial and strict performance. Now, we have an implied covenant in good faith in dealing, and that means every party in a contract requires them to implement the agreement as the intent of the agreement was, and you don't use means to undercut the purpose of the transaction. Okay, so let's talk about time for performance. If it says time is of essence and the time stated in the contract, then there's a material breach. So if they say delivery of goods by Wednesday, time is of the essence. If the other party does not deliver by Wednesday, they have materially breached the contract. If it's stated in or implied by the contract and later performance would have little value. So I didn't say time of the essence, but what I did say is we have a concert series this weekend. We need tents to be delivered for this at 10 o'clock on Saturday, and Sunday comes by. Even though I didn't say time is of the essence, it is implied. That's going to be a material breach. If it's stated or implied by the contract, but it's relatively unimportant, it's not going to be a material breach unless performance is unreasonably late. If it's delivered within a reasonable time, even though there's no time for if it's delivered within a reasonable time and there was no time for performance stated, then there's going to be no material breach unless the performance is unreasonably late. Okay, so even if the time for performance was within a reasonable time or it's stated, if it's relatively unimportant, it's not going to be a breach if it's late. So remedies. Remedies are what we call the enforcement by a court of a legal right. What legal right do I have? What remedy do I have? And we're looking at what interest is the court trying to protect. Breach would give us what we call the expectation interest. If someone breaches a contract, what we want to do is redistribute justice to put the plaintiff in the position had the contract been fully performed. So I have an expectation interest. I should get the expectation I had with my contract. Detrimental reliance. This is a reliance interest, which says plaintiffs, if they can prove that they had a reliance on a contract with reasonable certainty, the value of what they expected, they should be able to recover that interest, the same interest as if it was an expectation interest, because they relied on it. If it's an unjust enrichment, meaning restitution is going to be the way to prevent unjust. And restitution means I'm going to get whatever benefit I gave you back. And so, for example, if I conferred a benefit onto you, but we really didn't have a contract in the first place, we can ask that you pay me back in damages. Even if I'm the party that breaches the contract, I can ask for restitution if I conferred a benefit on you and got nothing in return. So this is just the interest. These are all legal interests. And then we have legal remedies, but we have equitable remedies. So instead of asking for monetary damages, I'm asking the court to compel the defendant to do something to act a certain way or refrain from it. Specific performance. It compels the party in breach to perform their obligations, okay? This is going to mostly be in land contracts or sales of shares. Somebody still has the property and they're refusing to sell it. I can ask for a specific performance. Or a party cannot compel, or a party will do this because the money they want isn't going to suffice. So to getting monetary damages doesn't